Today's discussion is being presented in two sections since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Tom Temin, host of the Federal Drive on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Let me turn over the reins to Tom to begin today's discussion.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guest today is Aubrey Merchant-Best. He's the Director of Security Strategy at Blue Coat. And we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, specifically network traffic and encrypted traffic, and something that's growing in federal networks and I guess in networks generally. So before we get into the details of protection, let's talk about the nature of traffic, how it's changing. What are the trends you're seeing in networks and network traffic these days?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. So when we think about what we're seeing on the network these days, it's no surprise that we're seeing an increase in encrypted traffic. Essentially, the purpose of encrypting traffic on a network is to maintain confidentiality and integrity. What needs to be considered, however, is what is actually in that encrypted traffic. When you think about it, the average user these days has at least 2 or 3 devices that are connected to the internet. Some of those devices are utilized for work. Some of them are utilized for work and personal reasons, let's say. But how do you really manage the interaction of the personal applications with the business applications? And how can you be, in fact, sure that no intellectual property is leaking through an encrypted channel that might otherwise go unnoticed? So what we're seeing is certainly a rise in encrypted traffic on networks. We could say that generally, it's going to be on the increase of about 10 to 15% nowadays. If you look at what a typical enterprise would have on their network, the ratio of encrypted traffic versus non-encrypted traffic, it's somewhere minimally, I would say, about 40% and as high as 75%.
Well, everybody's being told to encrypt traffic, and there's encryption schemes, there's encryption built into devices, and a lot of Homeland Security is worried about how much encryption is going on in devices they might need access to, and so forth. So should people not be encrypting, or is there something you need to do besides encryption to help enhance cybersecurity?
So there's some amount of balance that has to take place there. I mean, we can certainly understand the benefit to the public at large for having visibility into encrypted traffic, but there are concerns about potentially making traffic visible that might be related to healthcare information, for instance, or financial information. So you have to maintain some sort of balance, understand what it is that you're trying to protect, focus on those assets, and get the visibility where it's needed.
And what about the idea of encrypting traffic while it's on the network, while it's traffic, versus keeping it encrypted at rest? Is that an issue that people need to think about?
It is an issue that needs to be considered, but the other part of that equation is to understand who would have access to the data at rest, right? So if you're doing a proper job of locking down the data at rest and understanding the sensitivity of that data while it's at rest, keeping close ties on who's actually accessing that data, making sure that you have strong authentication and non-repudiation, of course, that's going to be very key.
Now, something that's big and growing in the government is the idea of continuous diagnostics and monitoring, or monitoring networks all the time instead of simply auditing them from time to time. And so you're going to be looking at a lot of encrypted traffic and monitoring that, and seeing what's going on there. So it seems as if the threat would be for malware to be encrypted along with the traffic you want to take a look at.
That's exactly right, and there are some statistics that have been provided by Gartner that would support the fact that about 80% of advanced persistent threats are utilizing SSL or transport layer security to ingress or egress sensitive information. So when you talk about continuous monitoring and diagnostics, again, you need to be able to balance the assets that you're protecting against the actual devices and the users that are accessing those assets and what applications are utilizing encrypted channels.
So if an APT or some other kind of malware attaches itself to an agency's network traffic, and that traffic is encrypted, then the malware also gets encrypted along with it?
That's exactly right. And the trend continues to be that folks that are writing malware are utilizing SSL for command and control channels, and also leaking sensitive information back out of your network.
And does this originate mainly with mobile devices? I mean, that's one kind of traffic that's wireless, often through VPNs, or virtual private networks. And then there's the traffic that originates in a desktop wired-in PC or similar device that goes over the Ethernet and the WAN.
I think at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter whether it's wired or wireless. We're facing the same threats. The reality is that when you consider what it is that we're doing with our mobile devices, you know, the last time I actually polled someone about how many apps they had on their mobile device, it was somewhere north of 100, and I've heard as high as 300.
Wow. So that gets you to the idea of needing to somehow wall off the apps that you don't care whether it's encrypted or not. You just don't want it in that space that is corporate or agency.
That's correct. And you know, there are companies, I don't want to say any names, this is not an advertisement or a plug for anyone, but certainly some of the larger manufacturers of mobile devices are now implementing ways to effectively containerize applications so that they don't have the ability to bleed between that specific container and what might be a public or private container.
But if you get the advanced persistent threat or the advanced attack into the space that is reserved for the corporate entity, then you're back to where you started.
Indeed, and you know, the biggest challenge with cybersecurity today is really understanding one simple fact, and I will quote Donald Rumsfeld: "We don't know what we don't know." So if we think about, you know, what the state of security is today, certainly we're able to block those things that we've seen before, but from an attacker standpoint, all they need to do is come up with something that no signatures exist for, and potentially they can skate right through your perimeter defenses.
All right, so we've established you need to wall off personal and corporate traffic or agency traffic, and you need to keep on encrypting, but that's not the full answer to cybersecurity.
It's not. Again, you know, what we have to balance is privacy against protecting our intellectual property, and utilizing, you know, hardware-based devices that effectively operate as an authorized man in the middle, intercepting SSL handshakes, re-signing a certificate, sending a copy of the clear text traffic to some network forensic tools or auditing tools if you prefer, or both. That's what you really need to be able to do. And you need to be able to do that in a way, again, that's going to at least leave your employees at ease, that you're not collecting any sensitive information about them specifically.
All right, before we get into the details of that, I want to just press you on one other question. And if malware is encrypted, is it still able to be active?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one of the big challenges with malware is, well, first of all, identifying it. So if we look at some statistics that we've seen from the Verizon breach report, as recently as 2013, but you know, quite frankly, it's only continuing to rise. Malware, about 80% of the time, takes hours or less to infiltrate your network, yet it takes weeks to months to be able to detect it. Once that malware gets into a system, what it's going to attempt to do is move laterally from one system to another to be able to maintain some amount of persistence, hence advanced persistent threat. So being able to identify patient 0, which is the first host that was infected, certainly is very important, but subsequently you need to understand what movement has been made internally within your network and being able to monitor that traffic as well.
So because it's traveling with the encrypted data, then the tools that people typically use really can't detect it, and so it can still be persistent and advanced, but still remain encrypted even at rest.
True. That's exactly right. And that's why we need to implement policies, really, to be able to define what it is that we're going to decrypt. And if we are going to leave things encrypted at rest, how are we going to implement some sort of key escrow mechanism to be able to interrogate that traffic to make sure there's nothing malicious within it?
Okay, so does that mean that it's necessary to decrypt it, look at it, and re-encrypt it again, or can it be viewed while it's still encrypted? I guess that's sort of an oxymoron, right?
That's correct, yes. You would want to effectively decrypt it while it's in flight, so to speak, inspect it, and be able to have some sort of near real-time response to it if you do find something malicious.
All right, so if I hear that solution, the first thought that comes into my mind, say I'm a CIO or a CTO in an agency, is, wow, that is really going to slow things down.
No. As a matter of fact, there are devices that are dedicated to performing just this function. In fact, when you think about it, a lot of next-generation firewalls actually have some of this capability built into it. However, depending on the amount of encrypted traffic that's present on your network, if you turn those features on, then the performance of the overall device drops to the to somewhere lower, let's say. So having something that's dedicated to just performing that task is definitely the ideal way to go.
Because when you say man in the middle, that is the format of a lot of attacks that happen that intercept information going one way or the other on the network. And so how can you distinguish between the legitimate man in the middle and the malware man in the middle? Let's say person in the middle.
So in both cases, frankly, it's a question of trust. So when you talk about certificates, you really can't do so without necessarily talking about the notion of a certificate authority. So when you think about, say, even within WTOP, I'm sure you guys have some certificates that are associated with your enterprise. Nothing would necessarily stop me from going to a certificates authority and say, hi, my name is Aubrey Merchandise, I work for WTOP, can I have a certificate, please? Now, they might have a process in place that would say, all right, I need to call so-and-so over WTOP and verify, in fact, that this person is who he says he is, and then once I make that verification, I can have a root certificate. You'd be surprised how often and how easy that is. And it's also really kind of exposed a lot of the weaknesses within the certificate hierarchy, or certificate authority hierarchy as it exists today. So they're looking at other mechanisms to be able to more rapidly respond to breaches of that type within the certificate authority so that we can maintain integrity of our data and maintain integrity of our communications.
All right, we're going to get into that a little bit more. We're going to take a short break. Our guest today is Aubrey Merchant-Dest. He is the Director of Security Strategy at Blue Coat. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is Security in the Age of Targeted Attacks here on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.